As a new student at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, starting my junior year was challenging. I didn't know anyone, and it was tough seeing that everyone else had already formed their friend groups. Lunchtime was particularly daunting, as juniors weren't allowed to leave the campus for lunch. Only seniors could. I dreaded eating in the cafeteria, knowing I would have no one to sit with and not wanting to impose myself at a random table. When lunchtime arrived, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray, scanning for a place to sit. Every table was occupied, leaving me with no option but to sit alone. However, in the corner, I noticed a table with just 2 kids. It seemed like the least intimidating spot, so I approached them and asked if I could join. They exchanged glances and one of them nodded, saying, "Yeah?" As I sat down, I realized they were identical twins who appeared to have some Hispanic heritage, yet they spoke without accents. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno and engaged me in conversation. To my surprise, they invited me to hang out after school. I figured it was a good opportunity to make friends, so I exchanged numbers with them. Later that day, after I dropped off my belongings at home, I received a text from Bruno. He suggested we meet up at a nearby cemetery at 9 p.m., just a 10-minute walk from my house. He mentioned there was a cool hangout spot by a small lake and that since the first day of school was a Friday, we had the next day off. With nothing else planned, I agreed. When the time came, Bruno texted again to confirm I was coming. I replied that I would leave shortly and we agreed to meet by the road next to the cemetery. As I walked in the dark, I reflected on my recent move and the experience of being the new kid in high school. I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to meet 2 kids I had just met. Upon reaching the road, I asked Bruno where they were. He quickly replied that they were in the woods by the lake and sent me their location. I ventured into the woods using my small phone flashlight to navigate. I started calling out for Bruno and Antonio, believing I was close. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching me, slow and deliberate. Someone called out, warning that they better not be trying to scare me, but they didn't respond to my calls. Feeling uneasy, I decided to turn back toward the road. Just then, the footsteps shifted from slow to fast, and before I could react, I felt nails digging into my neck, choking me. I heard a familiar voice shout, "Grab him! Grab him!" I managed to break free from the chokehold and sprinted toward the road. I could hear them following me until I reached the tree line. I ran straight home and told my parents what had happened. They considered calling the police, but I suggested we take pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report it to the school the next day. With the help of the text from Bruno, we reported the incident and the 2 students were expelled. My parents insisted I block their numbers, which I didn't argue against. They wanted reassurance that the twins didn't know where we lived, and I told them, "Not as far as I know." About a week later, I woke up to a chilling draft in my room. The sound of wind whistling through my window caught my attention, and I discovered it was completely open. I wondered if my mom had come in to open it, but that didn't make sense. It was around 50 degrees outside. I walked over to the window and looked down. Below my bedroom window was a ledge my father had always told me to jump onto in case of a fire. I shut the window and went to my parents' bedroom, gently knocking on the door. My mom groggily asked what was wrong, and I asked if she had opened my window. She replied no, looking concerned. I raised my voice, now more alarmed, explaining that my window had been opened by someone. She shook my dad awake and he reluctantly agreed to check my room with me. However, when he woke up, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. As I walked back to my room, I noticed my door was now half closed instead of fully open. I pushed it slightly to peek inside, half expecting to see someone hiding there. To my horror, there was indeed someone behind my door. I screamed for my dad, my voice echoing down the hall. Just as my dad rushed out of his room, the door slammed shut. I yelled, "There are people in my room!" He barged in and turned on the light, revealing a leg disappearing out my window. My dad dashed to the window and then downstairs, trying to chase them down. But he returned a few minutes later out of breath, saying he hadn't seen anyone. In a panic, I realized it had to be those twins I had gotten expelled. My dad called the police, and when they arrived, I explained everything, including the incident in the woods. My father supported my account, but without proof of who had entered, the police said there was nothing they could do. They advised us to lock our doors and consider installing security cameras outside. For several months, I lived in fear, but nothing like that ever happened again. Looking back, I question why I was so willing to meet those kids in the woods at night. I should have recognized the warning signs in the cafeteria that day and stayed away.
It was a stormy day in gym class during the last period. We had a substitute teacher, an older man, perhaps 55 to 60, with gray hair. As he took attendance, he did a double take when he passed me. I found it uncomfortable, not to brag, but I'd always felt I looked older than my peers and was quite attractive for a freshman. The substitute instructed us to form our volleyball teams and then disappeared into the hallway near the locker rooms. 40 minutes passed, and it was time to change and head home. When I got to the locker room, I discovered that my locker wouldn't open. I repeatedly tried my usual combination, but it wouldn't budge. Feeling frustrated, I approached the substitute to ask for my combination again, and he told me to wait a few minutes while he retrieved the list of locker combinations. After a short wait, he returned with a book open to a specific page. To my surprise, he walked into the girls' locker room with me, where only one girl was finishing up changing. He approached my locker and attempted the combination written down, but it didn't work, no matter how many times he tried. Each time he failed, he looked at me and laughed. I forced a nervous laugh in return, but as the situation grew increasingly awkward, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll figure this out." As he tried the combination again, his hand slowly slid down to my lower back. Feeling uncomfortable, I pushed away and grabbed my bag, saying, "It's okay, I'm late for my bus." Just then, the locker opened. He smiled and walked away, and I waited until I heard the locker room door shut before quickly changing. Suddenly, the lights went out. I finished pulling up my pants in the dark, shoved my belongings into my locker, and put on my backpack. I began walking toward the back exit of the locker room, which led outside. I was anxious that the substitute might be waiting for me by the door, as I felt he had predatory vibes. Reaching the end of the aisle of lockers, I stood at an intersection where I had to turn left to get to the exit. I glanced right to ensure it was clear. A sliver of light seeped in from a small window near the ceiling, allowing me to see him peeking around the lockers. At that moment, I ran for the exit door. He called out, "Wait! It's not what it looks like." I dashed outside into the rain and walked home, reflecting on the unsettling encounter. By the time I arrived home, soaking wet, I realized he had likely changed my locker combination to isolate me. I dreaded to think of what he might have planned when he cut the lights. I was too scared and embarrassed to tell anyone about it, not even my parents or friends. I kept this experience to myself for years because I didn't feel comfortable sharing it.
In high school, I was in the band, which was essentially the only option besides choir. Our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had a grading system that allowed students to earn an A as long as they attended class and completed their weekly lessons. Unfortunately, I missed 2 lessons toward the end of a quarter, which resulted in a B. After class, I approached him to ask if I could make up the lessons. Although he seemed reluctant, he agreed to let me practice during a lunch period in one of the downstairs storage rooms. The next day, I arrived in the music room with my saxophone and headed down to the basement area of the music department. It was always a bit creepy down there, as no one except the music teachers usually ventured into the dimly lit hallway. I'd only been down there a couple of times before. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed several small rooms used for storing chairs, music stands, spare instruments, and decorations. I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door, setting up my music on a stand in case Mr. Nicholson came to check on me. However, I didn't plan on actually playing. Instead, I started playing games on my phone. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. I instinctively flicked the light switch up and down, but nothing happened. Getting up from my seat, I opened the door, holding my phone in front of me to illuminate the dark hallway. My old iPhone didn't have a flashlight, but the dim light from the screen was enough for me to see one of the doors at the end of the hall open. I heard something being dragged from that room, along with strange animal-like grunting sounds. Seeing a large plastic container being pushed into the hallway, I quickly turned off my phone and returned to the room I had been in, shutting the door quietly. I didn't know what was happening, but the odd sounds and the blackout made me uneasy. Whoever was out there was blocking the stairs, and I had no cell reception in the basement. All I could do was wait in my room, hoping the lights would come back on. When it became clear they wouldn't, I decided to attempt to get back upstairs. I quietly opened the door, phone in hand for light, and crept toward the stairs. As I approached, I heard another noise and quickly slipped into the nearest room, shutting the door behind me. I still didn't know what I was hiding from. It could have been a staff member or a janitor, but I had my doubts since they usually only appeared after the lights went out. Standing in complete darkness, I listened intently for any sounds coming from outside. You know that feeling when you're in a room with someone, and even if you don't hear them, you can sense their presence? That's how I felt in that pitch-black room. I lifted my shaking hand and pressed the home button on my phone, illuminating the screen for just a moment. In that brief light, I saw someone standing in the corner of the room, just 3 feet away from me. I pretended not to see anything, but it was too late. I heard a hand pat my shoulder twice, then start to squeeze. In a panic, I fumbled for the doorknob, finally managing to pull the door open. The man inside tried to push the door shut, but I was already out, sprinting up the stairs and into the main level of the music hall, where the lights were still on. Out of breath, I ran to Mr. Nicholson and told him what had happened. He immediately called security to check the basement. When security returned, they reported that besides some disorganized music equipment, no one was down there. For the rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lesson, and I recounted the entire story to him and 5 flute players. Without cameras in the music hall, there was no way to catch whoever had tampered with the power in the basement. It seemed likely they were trying to steal expensive music equipment, or worse. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to provide my account of the incident, and that was that. One night, my friends and I devised a plan to sneak into the high school basement through a broken window that had never been fixed. To get to this window, we had to hop over a short metal gate surrounding the staircase leading down to the basement. While it wouldn't effectively stop anyone, it added an element of excitement to our little adventure. We ensured there were no security cars nearby and hopped the gate, crawling through the narrow opening of the window. Once we were inside, we dispersed to explore different areas of the basement. It quickly became clear that the basement was a disorganized mess and anything but interesting. The lighting was dim, with only a small white light flickering in a far corner, and the glow from the exit signs providing a bit more illumination. While I was looking around, I spotted one of my friends. He whispered, "Let's go upstairs," so I followed him up. When he opened the door to the main hallway of the school, I was surprised to find everything was dark. I had always assumed some lights would be left on at night, but there wasn't a single one lit. The only things visible were the glowing red exit signs. As we walked down the hall, I remarked, "Dude, this is really creepy." He agreed, and a sense of unease settled over me. I wondered if anyone else might be in the building besides us. I followed my friend to the bathroom, where he went into a stall. I waited for a while, and then my phone rang. It was another friend, Chris. He asked, "Where the hell did you go?" I told him I was upstairs with either Roland or Brandon. Chris replied, "What do you mean?" "They're with me." Right then, both Brendan and Roland chimed in, saying hello on speakerphone. I stuttered, trying to explain when I suddenly heard laughter coming from the stall. It was not the laugh of any of my friends. I looked up to see someone peering over the stall at me, probably standing on the toilet. I screamed, "Holy!" over and over into the phone as I bolted from the bathroom. Shortly after I exited, I heard the stall door slam shut behind me. I attempted to run back to the basement in the dark, but it was difficult to navigate. Fortunately, I managed to find my way back and started yelling my friends' names as I descended the stairs. When they responded, we quickly jumped off a bucket onto the window ledge and crawled outside. I was the first one out, terrified that the person from the bathroom might be following us. Once we were all outside, I explained what had happened, out of breath but relieved to be safe with my friends. However, as we looked around the school building, we noticed someone with their hands pressed against one of the downstairs windows. We could only see half of their face. I whispered, "That's got to be him." Roland urged us to get out of there, and we ran until we were off school grounds. Afterward, we came up with numerous explanations for what had happened, but none made sense. We never attempted anything like that again.